Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. For a long time, COVID lockdowns kept us at home, hidden, with in-person meetings and networking taking a back seat. But it's time to shake off those cobwebs, meet face-to-face and actually talk to people. So, look yourself in the mirror and get ready to perform. From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Thank goodness for technology during the pandemic. Tools like Zoom and Microsoft Teams were a godsend for meetings and pitches, but there's simply no substitute for face-to-face contact. Deals are made and business is brokered during those informal, off-the-cuff chats, be it in the lift or down the corridor, which Zoom, as good as it is, just can't provide. That observation is from Alan Manly, CEO of Group Colleges Australia, who recently was awarded an Order of the Medal of Australia for his services to tertiary education. Alan says we've got to rebuild our networking skills. He's talking to Chris Ashmore.
I think you have to go back to basics. I think you do have to get out. I think you've got to get your skills. I think one of the things that's a bit of a tragedy is I've had a number of meetings where people have said, if you don't mind, we'll just do Zoom. There will be some very superficial reason. And I think that's an expression of the barrier of getting dressed and going out. And it's showing up in some people. I notice the local coffee shops and such in suburbia are quite busy, and I think people are getting out. Business-wise, I think they've become a little lazy. I was at another meeting recently. The biggest decision of that board I was on was made when the chairman walked me to the car, because his car was near mine in the car park. And I tell you, Chris, as I touched the door handle, he finally agreed. Now, all I can say is, why didn't I touch the door handle earlier of my car? Now, I thought, that's the movement I had to do. Open the car, and he agreed. I thought, that's it. Now, that was because I think all of us were trying to work out when do you say yes or when do you say no. And it's always been a story, hasn't it, that when you're at a meeting, it's the walk to the lift when you're coming or going where the real story is told. Now, I love your proposal, Chris. Do it the other way next time and I'll get it through the board. That's as you go into the lift. It's not on Zoom. And I think we've got to get out and learn it. But I think I'm a diseased and inflicted optimist. So I think it'll always have a happy ending. The excuses for folks not doing things, I think it's a pity.
Elevator pitches, what do you think about them? Should we try to perfect our elevator pitch?
Well, you've got to work out what you're doing. One of my pet hates is I think people are going to go through the shock and horror that you imposed this Zoom camera in my bedroom, and therefore I look like a slob and I act like a slob. And you're lucky that I'm doing this for you because there's a pandemic. Pandemic is not over, but we're going to live with it. And I think you've got to get out. It's now back to showtime, and you've got to have your message on track. So, yes, I do think there's nothing better than a personal interaction. So you're now going to have to be showtime and professional, and you're going to get that person's attention. It's a privilege to have someone's attention for 45 seconds. It's a privilege. They will not get that 45 seconds back. So you've got to put your case forward and you've got to get your head around it. Now, interestingly enough, some old elevator pitchers probably say, we should meet for coffee sometime. You're hard-pressed to get a cup of coffee like the old days. I'll drop around your office, Chris, and we'll have a coffee. That doesn't seem to happen. It's more like, why don't we catch up? How about I do a bit of a presentation, introduce you to my services, Chris, on a Zoom meeting. The person's more likely to say, okay, I can afford 15 minutes because it's very controlled, isn't it? So if it comes in on time, you can have a meeting with a dunce like me, 10 minutes. And you can say, look, Alan, that was pretty impressive. Tell you what, why don't we have a cup of coffee? Now, that's why your elevator pitch probably won't be an elevator. It'll probably be on Zoom. And then when you meet the person, you've got to have the sales pitch again. Interestingly enough, I just did a Zoom meeting and the audience participation, the audience feedback is much less on Zoom. It was much harder to sort of work it out. So I think you've got to have your elevator pitch. You are selling. It's not just chat time. And you've got to be professional. I'm of the era of every call is a sales call. Every absolute call. You are always on display. So therefore, I think you've got to have your pitch. And your pitch is going to be a bit modified. But then you've still got to have your sales pitch ready for when you meet the person.
Mazars is an international audit, tax and advisory firm committed to helping clients confidently build and grow their businesses. To find out how Mazars can support your business, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.
First impressions, they count too.
Well, what is it? Will Rogers, as I remember the quote, you only get one chance to make a first impression. And I think it's great, and I absolutely love it. I live by it. I guess I had years and years of training as a salesperson in an American corporate, and every call was a sales call. I think it's also a respect for people. If you're asking someone to make a commitment to buy something from you, you're asking them to trust you, because anyone could be a crook. It's hard work doing an honest job and doing something properly and being responsible. It is hard work. That's why it's called work. And I think that you really got to be committed. The more committed you are, I think it's a matter of being honest. If you really like what you do and you want to do it with someone who will pay you for it, then yeah, I think you've got to be committed. And therefore, that follows.
You say every call's a sales call, but would you say that it's not necessarily a hard sell? It's getting them to know you and like you and all that sort of stuff.
What are they selling? They buy the image. We all buy the image. It sounds a bit of a distraction, but one time when I was much younger, I got myself into a few arguments I lost. And one of the ones I lost was I was asked, what's the biggest industry on earth? And I concluded it was probably the petroleum industry or the war industry or military or something. And I don't think I'd be alone there. And this gentleman, he said, you have no idea, do you? And I thought, how insulting. He said, the biggest industry on earth is art. I said, art? You can't be serious. Art? No one cares about art, I said. He said, really? Who chose your suit? Who chose your tie? Who cut your hair? All of them are artists. And you honoured them by choosing their product. And you chose them so committedly that you would wear it. It would become your brand. And when you walk in the room, you are saying, this is my brand. When you put on a garment and you wear it, you're endorsing it and that becomes you. When you walk in a room, you are advertising your brand.
After you finish meeting with someone, the sales process isn't really over, is it? What do you suggest people do once the networking event is over or once you've met the client when they go back to the office?
Well, it's a begged question, isn't it? Interestingly enough, I don't think a lot of people do it. I was trained to follow up, even if they're a dud. If you don't even want to do business with them, you thank them for their time and say, it was great meeting you, wish you well in the future and hopefully never meet at that function ever again as long as I live. You don't need any enemies. An old guy told me once that his enemy book was full. He had enough. He was now looking for friends. And he did business with friends. So he said, my enemy book is full, don't need any more, so we won't be making any more. And I thought, that's not a bad line. So if someone's ever kind enough to give me their business card, I make it a point of thanking them. Nice meeting you, chit-chat. Many of them are wasted, I admit. A lot of folks don't respond. But I'll tell you what, only recently I was at a function and I was with this gentleman and he talked to me and it wasn't that exciting, to be really frank. Now I'm doing business with him in a totally different environment. So you're only a couple of degrees separation. And if you've already met them at a networking function, there is a high risk they'll reappear in your life.
That was Alan Manly, CEO of Group Colleges Australia. Business Essentials Daily is a SoundCartel podcast. Producers are Nick Schilberger, Chris Ashmore, Jeff Waters and myself. Technical production by Pete Letts and Belinda Trimboli. I'm Nicole Goodman. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more Be Daily next week. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.